We're still 3 months away from college football 2013, but here on Mark Rogers TV, we are pumped. So we're checking out the best non-conference games on the schedule, looking at each league. First the SEC, the Big Ten. Now it's time for the ACC. And we look at Florida State, 12-2 last season. They won the Orange Bowl, but lost that regular season finale at home to arch rival Florida. The Gators dominated the back half of the fourth quarter and closed it out in defeating Florida State. The Noles lost more players to the NFL draft than any school in the country. But of course, Jimbo Fisher has probably recruited better than anybody in the country outside the state of Alabama in the last 3 or 4 years. So there's plenty of athleticism and speed waiting in the wings. Quarterback's the big question, with E.J. Manuel going to the Buffalo Bills. Jameis Winston, that's the guy that Florida State fans want to see behind center. He was the #1 rated quarterback coming out of high school in 2012, the redshirt freshman, the 14th overall rated player by ESPNU in that 150 class in 2012. He's going to need some help by the ground game as he gets comfortable. Of course, when they take on Florida, that's going to be the 12th and last game of the season. So we're going to know a whole lot about Jameis Winston. He is going to, again, though, need a ground game, of course, from James Wilder Jr. and Devonta Freeman. Rashad Green, that's his security blanket at wide receiver. Fortunately for Winston, he's got a veteran group of wide receivers. And again, Rashad Green is that go-to guy, the best of the bunch. He caught 57 passes last year. Florida State, great game all the time, but especially with the reemergence of both these programs in the past few years. Okay, Clemson takes on two monsters from the SEC. First, August 31st, the opener, week 1, and then also bookended on the end of the season against South Carolina. So for the opener, something we don't see very often. The ACC and the SEC, big heavyweights here. Not a mid-level game like Tennessee, North Carolina State last year or Clemson against Auburn. It's Clemson-Georgia. The Clemson Tigers, of course, finished off the LSU Tigers in the Chick-fil-A Bowl with a big fourth quarter comeback. They take on a Georgia team that almost went to the BCS National Championship game. Bring back 10 starters on offense, including quarterback Aaron Murray and super freshman running back from last year, Todd Gurley, and his backup, a freshman who almost ran for 800 or 900 yards, and Keith Marshall. Georgia, talent on defense, but they lose playmakers all over the place. This was probably not the best defense in the country, but the most talented defense in the country at Georgia. And if you watched the NFL draft, you know that the Bulldogs lost all sorts of skill and talent on that side of the football. Now, we know that they'll most likely become a fine defense in 2013, but to face Taj Boyd, who fired 36 touchdown passes last season in week 1, what a test for the Georgia defense. So again, Clemson, Georgia in week 1, and then Clemson, of course, faces, as usual, South Carolina in week 12. Last season, Clemson lost to South Carolina. South Carolina missing Connor Shaw at quarterback. No problem. Dylan Thompson stepped in, threw for 310 and 3 touchdowns against the Clemson Tigers as South Carolina capped off a 10-2 campaign, then won their bowl game against Michigan. So Clemson, 2 huge matchups. Credit the Clemson program for scheduling both Georgia and, of course, South Carolina. Week 1 for North Carolina State on August 31st. They will take on Louisiana Tech. The Wolfpack at 7-6 brings in a new head coach, Dave Doran of Northern Illinois. We know what he accomplished there in taking Northern Illinois to the BCS game, the Orange Bowl against Florida State. Doran comes in and right off the bat, he's got to replace an NFL caliber quarterback in Mike Glennon. The two competing for that job right now are Pete Thomas and Manny Stoker. 3 offensive linemen gone for North Carolina State, so they've got to retool on offense and defense. North Carolina State has lost its 4 top tacklers on defense, so a 7-6 team that lost to Vandy in the Music City Bowl is going to have to contend with a high-powered Louisiana Tech squad that went 9-3 last season. Okay, Wake Forest, best non-conference game by far for the Demon Deacons, November 30th. And in a game that the ACC and the SEC is trying to put together as a rivalry non-conference style, it's Wake Forest and Vandy once again. The Commodores routed Wake last season, 55-21. We expect more of the same. Jim Grobe did a great job in getting Wake Forest on the map into postseason contention, getting them to an Orange Bowl, if you remember back in 2007. But the program's taken a couple steps back. 117th nationally in total offense last season, despite a 3-year quarterback in Tanner Price. So Wake looks to be, again, a bit overmatched in this one against Vanderbilt, but certainly their best and toughest non-conference challenge, November 30th, Wake and Vandy in that matchup of the ACC and the SEC. All right, what used to be a traditional rivalry, Maryland and West Virginia. For the Terps at 2-10, Randy Edsall came from Connecticut, where he took the Huskies to a BCS bowl game, which seemed unfathomable at one point, and he was supposed to be able to save this Maryland program. Well, they've taken steps back as well. Again, 2-10 last season. Randy Edsall in from Connecticut, and he's got a quarterback competition with Ricardo Young, who took the spring snaps in place of the injured C.J. Brown, who looks to maintain his position at number 1 on the depth chart for Maryland. They've got a top running back at Brandon Ross, who ran for 122 yards in the spring game. He will share carries with Wes Brown at Maryland. So it's Maryland, West Virginia, the Terps' toughest non-conference opponent. West Virginia coming off, of course, that 7-6 campaign with all that offensive talent going to the NFL. So Geno Smith gone, Tavon Austin gone, Stedman Bailey gone to the NFL. The quarterback battle there for West Virginia between Paul Millard and Ford Childress. On to another of the lesser teams in the ACC, Boston College, coming off a 2-10 campaign, and they reward their new head coach, Steve Addazio, with a game against Notre Dame and also USC. We're going to select the USC game here against Boston College on September 14th as BC's big non-conference slate. Of course, they always play Notre Dame, so we'll talk about Southern Cal. This defense was not only atrocious by ACC standards, but nationally last in sacks and tackles for loss. Addazio comes in, and we expect him to squeeze just about as much out of this particular football team and down the road this particular football program, but he can only do so much. USC, of course, loaded with talent, but I don't know that there was a team in college football last season that put less effort out on the field than USC. If you saw the Sun Bowl in particular against Georgia Tech, it was sad. USC losing 21-7. They just did not want to be there. So Lane Kiffin has to come under some fire there, especially if USC duplicates 7-6 once again. So it's BC and USC on September 14th. North Carolina had a really nice season under first-year head coach Larry Fedora last season, and going 8-4. The bowl ban is over. The Tar Heels can go to postseason play. They would have played for the ACC championship last season, and they open with a huge game on a Thursday night. So the Tar Heels open 2 days earlier than just about everybody else in college football on August 31st. Big Thursday night showdown. North Carolina, South Carolina. Love this matchup. To check it out on a Thursday night. North Carolina, of course, coming off an 8-4 campaign, and they've got a great tandem quarterback to wide receiver duo of quarterback Bryn Renner. 28 touchdowns, 7 picks last season, all ACC performer, and wide receiver Quinshad Davis, who is an explosive wide receiver. So the Heels and the Gamecocks in week 1, that should be a good one as well. For the Miami Hurricanes on September 7th, their big games against the Florida Gators. And we love that these two programs have gotten together and are scheduling against each other once again. Miami and Florida, September 7th. Running back Duke Johnson is being talked about just on the periphery for the Heisman race. Duke Johnson ran for just under 1,000 yards last season as a freshman, a true freshman, and 10 touchdowns. Head coach Al Golden has done a remarkable job at Miami. When you consider the NCAA sanctions that have been hanging as a dark cloud over that program for the last few years, and there certainly will be more revelations to come concerning that football program and what happened certainly before Golden took over at Miami. September 7th, you've got Virginia taking on Oregon. The Cavaliers have Oregon and also BYU. Of course, the more winnable game is against the Cougars, but we're going to spotlight that Oregon game. It's at Virginia. The Cavaliers coming off a disappointing 4-8 campaign. Coach Mike London took over a couple years ago and really energized Virginia football. Took them to a bowl game. Looked like they were on the upswing. Well, they're taking a step back. We still believe that they're on the upswing overall, especially if you check out his recruiting efforts, but they've taken a step back. They probably will only win 4 or 5 football games this year, and this is not going to be one. But Virginia's going to look forward to, and certainly the fan base, welcoming the Oregon Ducks to Charlottesville on September 7th. Virginia 4-8 last season against Oregon, a 12-1 team that almost played for the BCS National Championship. All right, on October 12th, we've got Duke and Navy. Duke going to a bowl game for the first time since 1994. Credit David Cutcliffe, a very difficult place to win in football. They lose their quarterback Sean Renfree to the NFL draft. Duke and Navy coming off a demolition of Arizona State. They got trounced in postseason play 62-24. Duke finished last season at 6-7. But again, credit David Cutcliffe, who of course, his claim to fame, coaching both Peyton Manning and Eli Manning, head coach and offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach there at Tennessee going way back. On August 31st, a game that we highlighted in talking about the SEC and Alabama's schedule non-conference. Virginia Tech at 7-6 taking on the Tide, who of course won it all for the third time in 4 seasons. We expect this Alabama offense to be the best under Nick Saban, the best he has coached, the best talent. Of course, A.J. McCarron plays almost flawlessly at quarterback. You've got running back T.J. Yeldon coming back after a remarkable freshman campaign in which he scored 13 touchdowns, and including the game winner against LSU on the final drive. And Amari Cooper, one of the great wide receivers, young wide receivers in college football, coming off a sterling freshman season. For Virginia Tech, disappointing 7-6 campaign. Their best win was against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was not a very good football team. Virginia Tech just basically beat everybody they were supposed to beat in winning 6 regular season games. They did win the bowl game in overtime against Rutgers, a good springboard into this one. But yeah, this ain't Rutgers, it's Bama. And despite losing all sorts of players to the NFL draft, of course, we know Alabama with another number 1 recruiting class coming in 2013. Virginia Tech does return 9 starters on defense. So this defense could be really good. I don't know that game 1's a good measuring stick. I expect Tech to put up a bit of a fight early, but this could be like a 44-10 game when it's all said and done. Logan Thomas back at quarterback for Virginia Tech, but he's certainly going to have to be sharper than 51% against this Tide defense. Virginia Tech has lost its top 3 pass catchers from last season, so they're void of playmakers, at least proven playmakers on offense. Again, August 31st, Virginia Tech taking on Alabama. On November 30th, we've got Georgia Tech in Georgia. So Georgia back against the ACC after taking on Clemson to start the season. They've got the traditional game against Georgia Tech to wrap it up. Bulldogs won it easily in 2012, 42-10. Since 2009, Georgia Tech has really slid as a program. They won the ACC title, went to the Orange Bowl, lost to Iowa that season. Paul Johnson's program just 21-19 since that game. I say you got to scrap the option offense. Nobody plays it. Not going to be able to recruit to it, although he's done a nice job, but I know that's what he knows and what he loves to coach. But if you fall behind, and we know the nature of college football in this generation is that the games go back and forth. The games are played in the 30s to the 50s. Georgia Tech gets down by double digits, and they can't come back with that offense, the option offense. Big changes on defense for Georgia Tech as they go to a 4-3. They do have a veteran team coming back that went 7-7. Of course, lost the ACC championship game, then defeated USC in the Sun Bowl. USC didn't basically show up for that game. So again, it's Georgia Tech at 7-7 last season, taking on Georgia, that close to playing for the BCS championship game last year and returning 10 starters on offense. All right, we finish it off with the